States history when the person who got the most votes for president did not actually end up becoming president. 3 times in the 19th century and twice in our current century. In 2000, when George W. Bush became president despite losing the popular vote by half a percentage point, and most recently in 2016, when Donald Trump became president despite losing the popular vote by about 2 percentage points. Could it happen again? Well, this is the motivation behind the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It is agreement among a group of United States and the District of Columbia to award all of their electoral college votes to whichever candidate wins the overall popular vote. It is a way to effectively ensure a popular vote system for president without actually getting rid of the electoral college. Today, I do not want to talk so much about the merits of whether or not this compact is good or bad for the country. Instead, I'd like to talk about how close we are to potentially passing it and what I see is the most likely path to passing it. So if you look at the map here, you can see in green the states that have passed the compact and in yellow in states where it is currently pending. Now, the compact only goes into effect once a set of states whose combined total electoral college votes is a majority of the overall number of electoral college votes. This is to ensure that when they send all of their electoral college votes to the winner of the popular vote, it will actually ensure that the winner of the popular vote becomes elected president. So, as we can see, states who have a combined total of 205 electoral votes, or 38.1% of the electoral college, have currently signed on to the compact. And as you can see, we are only 65 away from the compact going into effect. Down below on the Wikipedia page, you can see a nice history of which states decided to sign on to the compact in what order. Starting in 2007 with Maryland and then a few other states, New Jersey, Illinois, Hawaii, Washington, Massachusetts, DC, and Vermont, to California in 2011, Rhode Island, New York, and then quite a gap after 2014 until 2018. Probably what happened there is that after 15 years after the last time that the winner of the presidency did not win the Electoral College, i.e. 2000, the urgency had started to fade a little bit. But then after it happened again in 2016, the urgency picked up again, and we had a slew of states here, Connecticut, Colorado, Delaware, New Mexico, Oregon, who passed it in 2018 and 2019. And then another gap until just last week, actually, when Minnesota became the 17th state to sign on, bringing the total to 205, or 76% of the way there. So, how many states are required to get there, and which states do I think are the most likely on the path to do that? Well, I've made a little Excel spreadsheet here that lists the states and whether their executive branch and each of their legislatures is controlled by the Democratic, the Republican Party, or whether it is split. So I've ordered them from top to bottom, from essentially most Democratic to most Republican states. And the reason is because since the Electoral College has, in the past two elections, given an advantage to the Republican Party, Republicans seem less likely to pass the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, even though historically the Electoral College does not consistently actually benefit one party over the other. However, this is the state we are currently in. So if we look at all the states that have actually passed the NPVIC and add up all their electoral college votes, we get to 205. And now I'd like to talk about the potential states that could pass it and get us over the hurdle to 270. We'll start here with Minnesota, which actually just recently, last week, passed it, bringing us to 205 because they had a Democratic House, Senate, and governor. The next most likely is Nevada because with its Democratic House and its Democratic Senate, it has actually passed the NPVIC in both of its legislatures. And traditionally, the bill would then be sent to the governor to either be signed or vetoed. Now, before the last election cycle, Nevada actually had a Democratic governor. And both houses were Democratic, and they passed the NPVIC. However, the Democratic governor vetoed the bill, likely because Nevada has recently become somewhat of a swing state, and he did not want to diminish its power. And since the last election cycle, the governorship of Nevada has flipped to the Republican Party. So you might be wondering, well, why did the two chambers of the legislative branch even bother passing it again? Well, because they took a different path this time. There is a way to get around the governor's potential veto by attempting to amend Nevada's state constitution itself. It works like this. Once the amendment has passed both legislatures, it must then be repassed by the next legislatures that come into power after the next election cycle. So after the 2024 elections, in 2025, it will have to be passed again. And then its ratification will then go to a referendum of the people of Nevada. And if it passes that as well, likely taking place in 2026, then Nevada will be part of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact without the Republican governor having had any say at all. So this is why I say that they are the most likely to pass it, assuming that they pass it again in 2025 and it passes the national referendum. Next, I'd like to go to my home state of Michigan, which for the first time in decades has a Democratic trifecta, a Democratic governor, Democratic House, and Democratic Senate. Now, I say that they are likely to pass it because they have been recently passing a lot of progressive bills, and I don't see, and they have both, and the NPVIC has been introduced recently in both the House and the Senate. So I don't see any reason why they wouldn't pass it or why Gretchen Whitmer, the governor, would not sign it. So I think it's only a matter of time, either this year or next year, that Michigan adds its 15 electoral college votes to the NPVIC's total, bringing us hopefully to 226. The next likeliest that I'd like to look at is Maine, which also has a Democratic trifecta. And I don't know too much about the politics of Maine, but given their trifecta, I'm hoping that they can add their 4 electoral college votes, bringing the NPVIC's total to 230. Only at that point would we be just 40 votes away from the magic number 270. This is where it gets a little tricky, because below this, there are no more states that currently have a Democratic trifecta. I put Pennsylvania as the next closest because they are only one away from the trifecta. They have a Democratic governor and a Democratic lower house, just barely, but a Republican upper house. So if Democrats do well in the 2024 election, it is possible that they could flip the Senate, leading to a Democratic trifecta, and hopefully they would be able to pass the NPVIC, adding their 19 votes, bringing the total to 249. The next state that I put here is Virginia, which has a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Democratic Senate. Now, Virginia is interesting because this state of affairs is quite recent. If we go over and look at Virginia's electoral history, we see that as recently as 2020 and 2021, Democrats did have a trifecta with a Democratic governor and control of both state legislatures. Now, they did attempt to pass the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact in 2020. It passed the House, but it ended up dying in committee in the Senate, as you can see on the Wikipedia page. Virginia passed in 2020 the House, but died in the committee in the Senate, unfortunately. But because Virginia was so recently a Democratic trifecta, I do not see any reason why in 2024 they could not flip it back. At least they could flip the state house back. They are very close with 48 to 52. The Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, will have a 4-year term, so he will not be able to be voted out until 2026. But if Democrats have a bit of luck in 2024 and 2026, they could return Pennsylvania to a Democratic trifecta and potentially pass the NPVIC, adding their 19 votes and bringing the total to adding their 13 votes and bringing the total to 261 if Virginia goes their way. The next state I'd like to look at is Arizona, which has a Democratic governor, but a Republican control of both state legislatures. However, the Republicans' control is narrow, razor thin in both cases. In the House, 30 to 29 with 1 seat vacant, and in the Senate, 16 to 13 with 1 seat vacant. If we take a look at Arizona's electoral history, we can see that just this year, Katie Hobbs flipped the governorship for Arizona to the Democrats. And if you take a look at the Senate and the House, it has been Republican for a very long time. But again, they are very, very close, seemingly closer than they have been in a long time to taking control of both legislatures. Plus, they went blue in the 2020 election. So I have hope that Arizona can potentially flip both of their state legislatures blue, giving them Democrats a trifecta and a possibility of adding their 11 electoral college votes to the total, bringing the NPVIC's total to 273, above the magic number of 270, at which point the compact would go into effect, and all of the states that have passed it would be bound to send their electoral college votes to the winner of the popular vote, effectively ending the electoral college as we know it and turning our election for president into one of a popular vote system. Now, I would like to just talk about a couple other states here. I have New Hampshire and North Carolina that I say are unlikely, but not quite a safe no, because they have both. Because North Carolina has a Democratic governor, and New Hampshire, though it has a Republican trifecta, has recently and often voted for the Democratic candidate at the national level in presidential races. So I say that they're unlikely, but not impossible. And the final state I'd like to talk about is Wisconsin. At first glance, you would say, oh, there's no way Democrats could get a trifecta. I mean, look, the House is 64 to 35, and the Senate's 21 to 11 with 1 vacancy. But they do have a Democratic governor, and the reason, most likely, that they have that Republicans have such a strong hold on the state legislature is because Wisconsin is notoriously extremely partisanly gerrymandered. There have been elections in the past few decades where Democrats have actually won the popular vote in the state house races, and yet Republicans have held the legislature. But most recently, just this year, Wisconsin voters had a vote for a pivotal open vacancy on their state Supreme Court, and overwhelmingly elected the liberal candidate. meaning that Wisconsin State Supreme Court now has a liberal majority. And the hope is now that that liberal majority will outlaw gerrymandering in their state. And so hopefully by 2024, Wisconsin will have fair maps, and what happened in Michigan could happen in Wisconsin, where for the first time in decades, the state could actually have a Democratic trifecta. But that's why I put it in yellow and say it all depends on whether the new liberal majority in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court outlaws gerrymandering and Democrats have a strong year in 2024. So again, given all this, I see that potentially by 2026, so not in time for the next presidential election, but in time for the 2028 presidential election, we could potentially have enough states to have signed on to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact that it would actually be triggered and go into effect, essentially turning the United States presidential election into one of a popular vote system. It's all going to hinge on things like Nevada keeping its control of, with Nevada's Democrats keeping control of their legislature in order to pass it again, and then Nevada's citizens passing the referendum. Things like Michigan and Maine using their trifectas right now, and especially Michigan's razor-thin Democratic control trifecta, to prioritize the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact and passing it. And then things like Democrats performing well in 2024 in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Arizona in order to flip to trifectas, which could definitely happen as all three of these states have voted blue in the last presidential election, and things like Wisconsin's State Supreme Court, which has a recent liberal majority, outlawing gerrymandering and pulling in Michigan, my home state, let's go, and allowing Democrats to fairly have a shot and potentially gain a Democratic trifecta for the first time in years, with a couple outside chances here with North Carolina and New Hampshire. But it seems not likely, but to me possible, that we could reach as soon as 2026 in time for the 2028 presidential election, enough states to pass the MPVIC and turn the United States into one that elects its head executive office by popular vote. Thank you all for listening to this video, and I hope you enjoy what you've heard, and you can use this information and tell your friends and push your state to pass the NPVIC. Thank you.